Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Thursday, May 30th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you on this episode. We'll have some baseball news you should know. Big change to MLB's official stats. We're going to dig into great detail into that next week, but we'll talk a bit about it here in just a moment. We had an eventful Mets game for late May. We'll talk about some of the fallout from that. Got a few injuries around the league. And as we promised on the Tuesday episode this week, we've got Eno's updated starting pitcher rankings. We're going to look at some other movers, mostly fallers, maybe a couple other risers that we didn't get to earlier in the week before we get to our Project Prospect segment and our weekend waiver preview. So things are jam-packed today, and they're jam-packed around the entire network because we're in the Final Four for the NHL playoffs as well. So be sure to check out the Athletic Hockey Show with Sean Gentili, Sean McIndoe, see what they've learned during the conference semifinals so far. That's on their Wednesday episode. Let's start with the baseball news you should know. The Negro League stats have been added to MLB's official record. And there's going to be a conversation on the Windup, our baseball show on Friday. Stephen Nesbitt's been writing a lot about this. Stephen and Chad Jennings will talk about it. Like I said, we're going to talk about this more in detail next week, but I think we're at this really cool crossroads where the opportunity to learn a lot more about baseball history is happening as a result of this project. And this has been 2 decades in the making, trying to put together official records and kind of capture some of the lost pieces of baseball history. And I think if you stay away from the comment sections under these pieces and just read the pieces themselves and find the perspectives from families of players that played in the Negro Leagues, find perspective from Black writers, find perspective from anyone outside of the comment section, and you will find really interesting perspective and ideas. And my broadest takeaway is that when we talk about baseball history, the players we talk about, that pool, will include players it should have always included, right? Josh Gibson will be mentioned much more frequently in the same breath as Babe Ruth as a result of changes like this. And it's complicated, it's layered, but ultimately, I think this is a great thing for baseball history on the whole.
Yeah, I made the mistake myself of, not maybe correctly honoring some of these stats that have come out in the past. And I think it's because they just, they aren't at my fingertips. They aren't at Fangraphs. They aren't at Baseball Reference. So getting them on there, I think, is super important. There's an interesting conversation to be had about assimilation where, is MLB taking ownership of the Negro Leagues in a weird way by doing this? There are some implications there, but I think in the end, this is a positive for everybody involved. And one of the ways that I feel good about it is that the panel that made these decisions on how to integrate these numbers and where to put them was a really good panel of a wide-ranging list of players, from Bob Kendrick, who's the head of the Negro League Museum, to CC Sabathia, the pitcher for the Yankees. You've got like a whole group, a whole swath of people that come from different perspectives, trying to come to some way to bring this in. And so let's not make this sort of like about an ownership of MLB taking over the Negro Leagues, but more putting their stats on the same par with others. And I think that one thing I've learned from doing Hall of Fame voting in the past has been that every stat requires context. Every stat, that we want to think of stats as objective facts, and yet when you look at a Hall of Fame vote and you make decisions about which stats you value over other ones. You make decisions about what context you're going to consider and which ones you won't. What sort of extra outside, legal things are you going to consider or not? Like there's all sorts of things that you consider. And this goes back to, like, if you think that Babe Ruth was one of the best players of his time, he did not play all of the best players of his time. And so if you think that Josh Gibson's numbers shouldn't be put on par with someone that played pre-integration baseball, that's weird, because what you're saying is that Josh Gibson didn't play the best players of his time, but neither did the people in the American League and the National League at the time. They did not play Josh Gibson.
Right.
And so just putting them there will help, and apologies for me in the past for any time that I've, minimized Negro Leagues accomplishments for, I just never had, I don't have the stats in front of me. I haven't had them in a good sort of a way. Now I love, going over to Fangraphs and looking at the new WOBA leader for his career is Josh Gibson. The new slugging percentage leader is Josh Gibson. The new WRC plus leader is Josh Gibson. I kind of love that. And again, you still have lots of context, because he did that in 2,490 plate appearances because the Negro League played in 60 game seasons, And so in some places you'll see that the minimum is 3,000 plate appearances or whatever. And that's going to, again, minimize some of these accomplishments. But I just love that they're there for you. You can make some of your own decisions and assumptions when you go there, but they're at least in the public record.
Yeah, we're very well stated. But yeah, we'll talk a lot more in detail about some of the ins and outs, probably on an episode next week. That is our plan, at least at this point. A lot of good stuff on The Athletic, a lot of good stuff outside of The Athletic too on this topic. So be sure to dig in, enjoy some great weekend reading. On the current side of things, the Mets had a pretty eventful Wednesday. So Edwin Diaz went on the IL with a shoulder impingement. That was a pregame move.
Pete Alonso left the game being hit on the hand.
Yeah, needed x-rays, had a CT scan. Everything came back clean, fortunately. So it looks like he avoided a major injury with his hand or wrist. That's good. And then Jorge Lopez got ejected by the third base umpire. And as he was walking off the field, threw his glove over the net into the stands.
What did he get ejected for?
I haven't actually seen
I missed that part of it. I just saw that. I saw the glove throwing.
That part of the story has been lost because Jorge Lopez, in the time after he threw his glove into the stands, was designated for assignment by the Mets and then made post-game comments that if you listen to the actual audio versus the transcripts that were put out there, there's some uncertainty as to what exactly he said in that moment. And I think people have blown up those comments to be the worst they could possibly be. And I'm not sure that's quite exactly what was said or intended to be said in this instance. So, Mets gonna Mets, I guess, is the primary takeaway here.
Well, I mean, the big thing is that, Jorge Lopez's first language is not English. And he was obviously in distress. And
clearly,
I think probably the best move would have been to say, hey, not right now, or at least give him some moments before we do the scrum or whatever. So he said something about being the worst effing team in baseball. But if you listen, it sounds like he's saying, I'm looking, and he doesn't even say the word like, but you kind of have to assume that he means looking like the worst effing teammate in baseball.
Right.
To be fair to the people that took that quote, they asked him to confirm. But to be fair to the player, he is in obvious distress. And some of the additional reporting that came out afterwards from Will Salmon said that he'd already met with the manager and with David Stearns. Now, if you are going to be disciplined on the team and say like, oh, we're going to fine you or something, then I think that would be the manager would suffice. To me, the fact that David Stearns was in on that meeting might suggest that he already knew he's being DFA'd. Mm-hmm. If you know you're being DFA'd and you say some stuff and then they're like, worst team or whatever, you're like, please, I just don't want to be here anymore. That's the energy he was giving off. Like, I don't want to be doing this right now. I don't want to be here anymore. This is not a good situation. And so today, and that's, people that Spanish is their first language. Like Manny Gomez, who was in the locker room, and our friend of the show, Arvin Gonzalez, pointed out that it was more teammate than he was saying. So he was sort of saying that he was sorry for throwing the glove and being a bad teammate, but his frustration boiled over, and so now he's no longer a Met. I think he will actually get picked up. There's enough stuff there. There's enough, he's a viable enough guy to be someone's fifth reliever for sure. And so, if you, there are better days in front of you, Jorge Lopez.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've seen recent success. I mean, even his stretch with the Orioles last season kind of looked a little more like what we saw back in 2022. I think it's strange to take the worst day for a reliever on a team that is underperforming and kind of use that as a microcosm for the whole season. That's sort of what the framing has been. 22 and 33 is the record entering play on May 30th. I mean, that's not what anybody had thought the Steve Cohen Mets were going to be like at this point in his ownership tenure. But if you just take a look back at David Stearns taking over the Brewers several years ago, year one, they won 73 games. It takes a little bit of time. That was a Stearns Council team. I think year two, they won 86 games. And in year three, they were one win away from the World Series. Baseball takes time, and people are impatient. I get it.
There's no way that they're the worst team in baseball. I'm sorry. Like, you take away the record and look at the names on the back of the jerseys. Look at the amount that's been invested in this team. Look at the raw stats. I mean, by WRC plus, they're middle of the pack. By pitching WAR, they're middle of the pack. Maybe a little bit in the back. Like, they are not starting at zero.
No.
I mean, one of my favorite pickups around the league right now is Tyler Megill. Or is it Trevor?
Tyler.
Trevor is the Brewer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Tyler looked really good. The velo was up. When the velo's up, it's a really intriguing package there for him. That's a bit of a player development victory for them. Christian Scott is a player development victory for them. So you're actually seeing some of these investments underneath the hood already paying off. They're going to run payrolls that are going to be 3 times what the A's roll out there, So in terms of player development, way ahead of the A's and White Sox. In terms of investment, way ahead of the A's and White Sox. So, like, the very least, they're not like A's, White Sox, and Marlins, which is their own real nice brand of stink. They're not in that bottom 3. In fact, if we were going to do a true talent, organizational wide, state of the franchise, wouldn't you put the Mets? I mean, 20th, 15th? Like, they're not. Like, where would you put them? I mean, this. I know this is not a rigorous thing here. We're not doing a rigorous, but like, just sort of like look at it and just guess.
I mean, if the question is kind of driving at how far away are teams from winning a World Series, and if you're just evaluating starting points as of right now, they'd be mid-pack because their resources are off the charts, and they will get the right people in place. And you think about, if you're not making a push and you're not leveraging being able to go out and acquire whatever free agents you want because either the market kept you away from a guy like Ohtani or Yamamoto, then like, what else are you going to do? Like, if you're not going to get the best of the best players available, it doesn't necessarily make sense to throw darts out there at the next wave if they're not going to make a big difference on your outcome for this season.
I mean, just look at the Giants. Like, we wanted them to do something. They did something. They bought all of the second level free agents. They spent the most on second level free agents in baseball this year. And they're honestly still kind of boring and not that great.
Yeah. You could put those guys on a team like the Mets and they'd be 5 or 6 wins better potentially, but they'd still be third in their division in the current state. So it's the long game. I'd say they mid-pack, to answer your question. I mean, they have got a handful of guys that are just not playing very well. Alonso, before this injury, 761 OPS for Pete Alonso. That's pretty strange through 55 games. Jeff McNeil hasn't been himself.
Lindor's kind of a slow starter sometimes. So, like,
he's been like just weirdly unproductive. There's a lot of underperforming players here. I think that's where a lot of the tension comes from. Francisco Alvarez has been hurt. I think once he comes back, that adds a lift. So it's not all as bleak as it's made out to be with the Mets. I've tried to say it before. I think they're headed in the right direction. It's taken a little longer than expected to get the car driving down the highway the way you might like. By the end of this season, they'll look better at the end of the season than they do today.
You know what I think the Mets need to do? I'm slightly serious about this. Build high rises in towards the water
to change the weather patterns.
Yeah. There's something weird about how that place plays. It shouldn't be as pitcher friendly as it is, I think. And I don't know.
Totally.
I'm kind of a little bit serious about that. Maybe they could do what Cleveland did and lop off part of the top of the stadium.
I don't think that's the long-term plan. It's a relatively new ballpark, and I think you expect to be able to fill that ballpark on a consistent basis like 2 or 3 years from now, because your team's going to be a lot better than it is today. So you're going to need those seats eventually if you're going to take an optimistic approach. But yeah, between Lindor and Alonso, two established stars not hitting their level, you look at Brett Baty as someone hasn't clicked yet.
McNeil contract was a bad idea.
Sure, but it's the combination of a lot of factors. It's not any one thing that's holding the 2024 Mets back. Let's get to some of your other starting pitcher rankings for a bit. We did talk a lot about fallers. I think it's always a bummer to lower players in rankings, especially players who are healthy. It's easier to lower the injured guys. Well, okay, they're just out. I'll deal with them moving back up when they're healthy. And if I don't move them all the way back up to where they were, it's probably because they're not completely healthy. And I feel okay about that. But the nothing seems to be wrong physically droppers, those guys are kind of a bummer. But Michael King, I think, deserves another conversation, because going through the winter, so much stock was put into what he did at the end of last season in the Yankees rotation, kind of being the best current pitcher of the guys acquired in the Juan Soto deal. I think also amplified expectations on him, getting out of Yankee Stadium, moving into Petco. All of those good things were all happening together. Some things have been good, some things have been bad. We've talked a lot about the issues he has against lefties, maybe being the biggest hurdle for him long-term as a starter. Homers have been the main skills flaw so far this year, right? 13 homers in 66 innings, and almost more walks this year in 66 innings than he had in 104 and 2/3 last year. He's got 29 walks on the season compared to 32 with a larger workload last year. So what do you make of what we've seen from Michael King? Are you seeing signs of leveling out? Because you dropped him from 32 to 48. So even if you're a 48th ranked starting pitcher, you're usually in the lineup. You're still pretty consistently viable in fantasy. All of his home starts for the most part, I think, would be usable. And then you just got to pick your spots carefully on the road based on what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, generally, my worry is tied into that production against left-handers, and also just that his velo just fell off so much. Starting as a reliever and finishing the season as a starter with the Yankees, he basically was relieving for 5 innings at a time for the Yankees. And I think the approach this year was, he said this publicly, the team has said this, it's an obvious need for him to pitch as much as he can, right? To pitch a full starter's workload. And so he's come into the season trying to be more of a starter, and that has led to the velo dropping almost linearly from start to start. I mean, he's down to 92.8 now in his last start. And then you pair that with the stuff rating saying, well, okay, at this velo, he's not the same as he was, stuff wise. The fastballs have all fallen below 100 stuff plus, and overall he's sort of average now. And then you look back at the splits and you see like, okay, versus lefties, he's given up 6 home runs and, in fact, righties have a higher slugging percentage, 438 against King this year. So really it's just all across the board. It's just, he's not as good. It's not as good as I expected. And yes, the K-BB is still good, but 26 minus 10 is 16. Average is 14. So neither, if you're looking at the K9s and thinking he's just as good as last year in terms of that, no, last year he had 29.5% strikeout rate, King did. And this year he has a 26.2. Like, he's down in strikeouts, up in walks. Velo is down. And so it was just enough for me to say, this is not a guy that I trust for every start. And that's a little bit where he dropped below that line.
Completely fair. And I think that's a good breakdown of why it's happened this way for Michael King to this point in the season. Justin Verlander fell kind of from a similar place. He was at 36 down to 52. Verlander's really tough. I mean, I think it's the age factor. It's what was happening last season. The recent outings, including one that just happened against Seattle on Wednesday, which would have happened after the rankings were submitted, 9 Ks, 1 earned, just 3 hits over 7 innings against Seattle. That looks more like vintage Verlander. I mean, his last 4 starts, 8 Ks, 8, 9, 9 in there with one rough outing against the Brewers where he only went 4 2/3, gave up 4 runs, only struck out 3.
Except I watched those games. I was at... Yes.
You're at the Oakland one.
Yes. I was at the Oakland one, and I watched the Seattle one last night while the kids were having their screen time. And I would say that it's really strange. The execution is not there from pitch to pitch. It's the shapes are there and the velos are there, and overall, it'll say that, the command is fine. So in terms of the model, it's fine. But it's a bit of a scouting thing for me where I'm just like, I don't know. I think that the recent run of success has as much to do with the quality of the opponent as it does with the quality of Verlander. And what made me nervous was that despite, he has 20 inches of ride on his fastball and, still throwing 94 miles an hour on average. And, so Stuff Plus says he's still good. Stuff Plus has said he's good for the last 2 years. And now we're settling in. We're settling into a 22% strikeout rate. And I just don't know that that's enough to keep up a low 3 ERA.
I'm a little more optimistic on Verlander. I think in part because he didn't start the season on time. So I think some of that kind of scouting, like he's not locating or executing as well. I think it would surprise me if that didn't improve at least a little bit going forward. And I think the big thing for me is I'm splitting out the stuff numbers by year, which you can do on Fangraphs. You can hit the split seasons, do a custom player thing, and you can see what's changing along the way. The big difference for me is the fastball is grading out a lot better. The slider compared to last season is a little better. Curveball is a little better. Changeup's a little better, but the fastball is a lot better. That gives him, to me, a little higher floor. I'd be shocked if the K rate stayed in the low 20s. I think 25, 26% is still very reasonable. Maybe even a little bit more than that's possible. Like everything we're seeing from the underlying numbers outside of that execution, to me, suggests that the 2022 strikeout rate is even possible for the rest of the season.
And the strikeout rate itself is kind of a process stat.
Right.
It's not good. It's not good.
Well, it's not good right now, but I think it's going to be better than it has been to this point.
All right. It's fair. I tripped over it a little bit. One reason that I ended up finally pulling him down was that his projection was for a 4.22 ERA, and I think that's as much aging curve as anything else. So in essence, we're rehashing the Paul Goldschmidt debate here.
Yes, I think so. And I think because the granular things we can look at within a player's profile for pitching, I think are a little more reliable right now than they are for hitting. That gives me more confidence, deserved or undeserved. It gives me more confidence that there's a little more in the jar when it comes to Verlander at this point. Joe Musgrove also kind of in a similar shift as far as taking a tumble down the rankings. Interesting too, his slider by the stuff numbers is up, but his fastball, while it's better than it was last year, is still not good. I think I have some of the concerns you expressed about Verlander. I think I have more of that on Musgrove right now because maybe it's because there's less of a track record
and there's
in the grand scheme of things. And I think the injury complications seem like they're a little more there at this point.
And also there's a very clear process that has just not been the same since before Mexico last year. He's just as likely to come out there and average 92 in a game as anything right now.
Yeah, he's 92.6, I think, for the season is where he's sitting right now. The
and the last two starts are like 92.1 and 92.2. So like not trending in the right direction. And you know, while he does have some good games on his ledger, the last one against the Yankees, 5 1/3, 5 strikeouts, 1 earned it's got to be considered a victory. On paper, in terms of process, at least, he had a good start against the Reds before he went on the IL. So he's had some good starts, but I think the general thing for me is just he can't throttle the fastball any more than he has. You know what I mean? Like he's down to throwing the fastball 20% of the time in a lot of his starts. And, I guess he can go fastball, cutter, slider, curve, kitchen sink at you basically. But the hard stuff is just falling so far behind that I don't know. I think he's going to have homer issues this year because they're going to sit on those fastballs and they're going to hit them. He's going to be able to keep the strikeout rate. He might even, strike out 22, 23% of the guys going forward and be good there. But I think, he's a 1.15 home runs per 9 for Joe Musgrove for his career, 1.82 right now. There's a bit of a guessing game when it comes to home run rates in season like this. I'm just going to guess on the heavier side. Something like the Bats 4.12 ERA with a 1.18 whip and 1.3 homers per 9 feels about right.
Yeah, seems fair at this point for Joe Musgrove. Let's talk about Aaron Civale. He's one of 2 Rays that fell a long way in this update, and it makes sense. The ERA just a shade under 6. The whip is at a career worst at 134. We are seeing a strikeout per inning from Civale up at this point, 57 Ks and 56 2/3 innings. One thing that jumps off the page, aside from the home run problem, which he's had at many points in the past, the career worst home run rate so far, but a 94.7% zone contact percentage. That is extremely high. That alone gives me some pause about looking at, Sierra at 376 and saying he's going to pitch to that going forward. I'd be very reluctant to buy into that as a true measure of his talent right now when he's getting hit in the zone as often as he is.
Yeah, the number that also opened my eyes is the home and away splits for strikeouts minus walks. And it's not something that I normally look at because most places don't have that big of an effect in terms of stadium's effect on strikeouts. But we know that Tampa Bay augments strikeouts more than anywhere else. I can tell you from my research into Stuff Plus that Stuff Plus is best in Tampa Bay. And domes are good for Stuff Plus. So you get a team that has their own Stuff Plus, that acquires players by Stuff Plus, coaches them by their type of Stuff Plus, and then has a stadium that augments their Stuff Plus. And so you look at Aaron Civale, and this year he has a 27.9% strikeout rate at home. He has an 18% strikeout rate away from home. And his K-minus BB at home is 22.5 for Aaron Civale. Away, it's 9.6. that goes from, top quartile to bottom quartile. And you could say it's just a trick of the schedule or this or that, but it goes back to last year when he was acquired by the Rays, same deal. And if you think about his home away splits in context of the team's strengths and weaknesses and what the park does, to me, he's a home start only right now. Even this year, he's got a 4.45 at home and a 7.4 ERA away from home. And again, I don't stare too many holes into splits like that. But when you've got the sort of underlying numbers doing the same thing, and you got this whole story of how the Rays acquire and develop and what their stadium does, I think of him as a halftime starter now.
Yeah,
I think that's he proves me wrong.
I would be curious if you looked at a zone contact percentage leaderboard for starting pitchers. I mean, if you do qualified and you choose, now I'm looking at the StatCast version of this metric, so the numbers are a little bit different, but 91.5% is a zone contact percentage by StatCast. That's the highest among qualified starters.
Wow.
Aaron Civale leads the league in a bad stat. Other guys on this leaderboard, I'm just curious if this is a place you'd shop or if it's a metric that needs more context, which most metrics. Civale, Javier Assad, Logan Webb, Zach Gallen, Jose Quintana, Miles Michaelis, Christopher Sanchez, Patrick Corbin, Bailey Falter, and Ranger Suarez are your top 10. And they're all 89.3% or higher. So they're a lot of contact in the zone in this group. And
I think the biggest piece of context that you can filter out all the good names on this list except for one with one stat.
Ground ball rate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing you'd want to put next
to it. So then you're left with a bunch of bad players. And then the I guess the three that we would have to figure out how we feel about them are Assad, Gallen, and Falter. Falter to me is a flash in the pan. I did just pick him up on audio for $1 because I'm desperate for starters. But I think of him as best case scenario, deep league home start. So that's where I'm at with him. Javier Assad, I think, is a big regression candidate. I've said why I like him, and I still like him, but I like him as a major league average starter, basically.
Yeah, and his results to this point have just been so much better than that. A 281 career ERA, a 125 whip in 205 innings. Like, that doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah, and then I think I don't know, Gallen is a mixture of really, kind of league leading-ish command, good feel for his pitches. He has become more of a two-pitch pitcher recently than I expected. But I don't know. He also, his stuff is down. So that's part of the story. So I think Zach Gallen is basically the big question mark on this list.
The other Rays pitcher that fell a good bit in the rankings is Zach Eflin. Their strikeout rate's down.
Who is 12th in zone contact rate.
Right. Yeah, he's right there. Just missed the cut before. Isn't getting a lot of outs on the ground. Actually, it's like his highest, it's his lowest ground ball rate since his rookie season, all the way back in 2016. So that's a little bit odd. Fewer swinging strikes, more contact in the zone. The control has always been good. He's 1.6% walk rate. So like the ratios are good, but the K rate's low. Is that the main problem? He's just not missing enough bats, and that's where he's going to lag categorically.
Well, some of the story was that the Rays took him and pumped up his breaking ball usage and really reduced his fastball usage, and that's part of why he's good last year. And to some extent, I believe it. It's in the numbers. It's he doubled his cutter usage. He upped his curveball usage by 40%. Not 40 percentage points, 40%, and reduced his fastball from 56% to 38%. So that all was true last year. He's kind of, I don't know why, but he's gone back to looking a lot more like the Phillies version. At least he's gone back in that direction. Fastball is up, cutter is down, curveball is down, and the curveball being down from 26% to 19.6%. Makes me feel like that's related maybe to the back issue. Sometimes you'll hear from guys like I've definitely heard this from pitchers. Why don't you throw this pitch that rates so well? Because it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And the main reason he fell, though, was he was on the IL.
Yeah.
He was on the IL, and I wasn't sure how long the IL stint would be, and I wasn't 100% sure how good he was. So to compare all that together makes me feel like, okay, I don't know necessarily where to put him. I put him among some injured players, I think.
Yeah, and for now, it looks like he's trending toward the shorter end of the 2 to 4 week timetable that was put out there. He's going to have a light bullpen session today. He's going to do more on Sunday, and then from there, the Rays are supposed to come up with the next steps. That's according to Ryan Bass of Sports Sun. If
he comes back out in 55, he comes back and he's healthy again. I could at least, see him, jumping into the 30s, like maybe around Yusei Kikuchi level. Kikuchi's going to strike out more guys though. And that was, that's a big thing that's missing for Eflin. Even in our stuff-based projections, he has a 21.8% projected strikeout rate. You can't forget about that. When you're ranking these guys, a lot of the times people are say, well, why isn't Brian Bayo higher? Well, I've got him projected for a 20.5% strikeout rate, and that is a category in fantasy. Why isn't Suarez higher? I've got him projected for 21% strikeout rate. So that's the projected strikeout rate, and the health is really the two poles that required me to drop him.
We should have some hitter rankings coming out late next week. It's going to take a little more time to get that next set up, but looking forward to talking through those once they become available. Let's move on to Project Prospect, which is really another injury segment.
Well, this is kind of a prospecty thing. I did move. I'm playing around with just like keeping the latest rankings in the Google Doc kind of updated. Just like using that as my working ranks. And I moved Ben Brown up. Ben Brown, when I put the rankings out, Ben Brown was a reliever, and they had just decided that maybe what's his face was leaving the rotation. Kyle Hendricks was leaving the rotation.
Yeah.
And so I had him a little bit lower just because I didn't know what his role was. I've moved him up to 73 right now. And he even could be low 60s, like Brandon Pfaadt-ish, Jordan Montgomery-ish. One thing that Brown's not going to do for you is length, and so he may not get you a lot of wins. He may only go 4. He may be like their 4.5 innings guy. And as a 2-pitch starter, you're seeing better 2-pitch starters have struggles. So I'm excited about him. And the stuff is great. But Christian Javier's stuff is great, and I'm not as excited about him. So I'm going to put him in the 60s for now, Ben Brown.
Yeah, the other factor for the Cubs is Jordan Wicks is working through a rehab assignment. So eventually, if they activate Wicks, they got to make a decision.
He still lose his job.
Even though last time out, we saw 7 no-hit innings, 10 Ks, just 2 walks, 93 pitches against the Brewers. Ben Brown looked fantastic. The slider really grading out nicely in the model as well. So I do think it's going to be a pricey ad if we're talking about weekend waiver pickups because of how good the last outing was. But
and it may be a trap. You may spend a bunch of money and then you lose him in a week when Jordan Wicks comes back.
Lose them and then maybe get him back 2 weeks after that because everything is written in
someone
pencil.
Else gets hurt. Yeah.
We're going to talk a lot about just how difficult it is to have a limited runway on the Friday show at Trevor May, 1:00 Eastern. We'll go live on our YouTube page because there are some players that this is not the case for Ben Brown, but sometimes your opportunity to secure your role long term, it's like a few
I think
weeks.
It is actually the case for Ben Brown
because
they could make him the closer just as easily as making him the fifth starter right now.
They do have such a clear need in the bullpen, but I think they would. This is a guess. I think they would use him that way, but still keep the light
Options
on for
open.
Future use as a starter. I think they would at least have that. Some organizations don't have that though. But yeah, we'll dig into some situations like that on our Friday show. So other project prospect news, tons of injury stuff. We're just going to kind of fly through these rapid fire so the show doesn't end up being 2 hours long. Wyatt Langford's back from the IL, so some good news there. So be sure to get him back into your lineups. I don't think he was really dropped anywhere, but a drop that you may have to consider in most redraft situations. Junior Caminero has a grade 2 quad strain. He's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, we can't wait 4 to 6 more weeks plus maybe more time for him to get comfortable again in redraft, can we?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that's a drop that you've unfortunately had to hold on to for a couple of months in many cases. Jasson Dominguez playing center field in his rehab assignment now. He's headed to, it's a question, is he headed to AAA once he's eventually ready, or do the Yankees fit him into their lineup?
I mean, they're killing it right now. Who do you sit? Stanton isn't hitting for average, but he has a 116 WRC plus. He's 13 homers.
Yeah.
Verdugo, where is he? Why am I not
117 so far. I mean, kind of doing typical Verdugo things. Low K rate, only a 321 OBP, but doing enough where you'd want to keep playing him.
Like, if somebody could play first, Rizzo is at 98 WRC plus, but it's not like atrocious work. He has 7 homers. You know, he's doing okay.
Yeah.
None of these guys can play second, so Gleyber Torres is fine for now.
I hope it's summer of Gleyber, but man, this has not been the first 2 months that I was hoping for from Gleyber Torres.
Not at all. I mean, I've a couple of my favorites: Gleyber Torres, Cedric Mullins, Chas McCormick, hurting me.
Yeah. We saw James Wood. Let me back up for a second. I think the takeaway on Dominguez is he might not be an obvious redraft stash because there's not a place for him to play right now. But as we know, that Yankees older core has injury issues, and that could change. If you're one of those key guys goes down, then suddenly you're really interested again.
If you're in first place and you don't have like a lot of IL on your bench, like it might be interesting to have him for $1, you know, on the back end of your bench, because it's not like Aaron Judge is the paragon of health. And I feel like Jasson Dominguez is the obvious injury replacement if one of those guys gets hurt. Stanton gets hurt too.
Right. I think even Judge's stuff is a little more fluky in nature, but Stanton, it seems like there's always an IL stint looming for Giancarlo Stanton, just quad, hamstring, things like that pop up on him. Speaking of hamstrings, one of the more popular stashes right now, James Wood, just landed on the 7-day IL.
I thought he was
hamstring
close,
tightness.
Especially with the DFA of Robles. I thought this is more room in that Nationals outfield.
Yeah, I think it's probably August. I think they're probably looking at James Wood more like we saw like the Corbin Carroll, Gunnar Henderson promotions a couple seasons ago. Because then you leave the door open for all of the perks.
Keep his rookie in 2025.
Yep. I think that's where they're headed.
You play him sparingly so that he doesn't use up all of his rookie eligibility.
Right. He gets experience. You get a better look at him against top level pitching. You see how ready he is for day 1 of 2025, and then you go from there. That's what it seems like they're doing. Fortunately, it's just tightness. Doesn't sound like it's a major injury for James Wood. Jett Williams had another cortisone shot in his wrist. I didn't see that he had the first cortisone shot. So when I saw a second cortisone shot, I wasn't feeling good, but it actually helped kind of explain why Jett Williams hasn't produced much at the plate this year. One of the higher ranked prospects out of the Mets system, and young for the level at AA. That's the level where he finished. Played a handful of games there last year, but the slash line has been underwhelming this year. I think health is a huge part of the reason why.
Yeah, my son's a big fan.
He likes him. The name.
No, it just also loves
small.
He's short. Yeah. He's rooting for him. So, I hope he gets it together. The fun thing is the amount of power that comes out of that frame. And that's what's been missing this year. I mean, everything's been missing. But I hope he gets it right. And maybe, maybe surgery isn't the worst thing in the world if that's what it comes to, because something's not right.
I would say, like, when I see players like this who are pretty highly regarded on multiple prospect lists and they're having a bad couple of months and there's a health related reason, that's a good time to try and get that player in a trade. So even if you are playing for now and you're swapping prospects to get a deal done, trying to get Jett Williams back is a pretty sharp thing to do because he's a big part of the Mets' future, maybe a part of the Mets' more near future. Drew Gilbert will be out until the second half of June. That's according to Will Salmon of The Athletic. I thought Gilbert was a candidate to maybe come up a little earlier if he tore the cover off the ball. He's only played 7 games so far this year, though. So it's probably more like a late season call up if they trade everybody, have spots open, and want to do that sort of thing where they give him that look, see if he's ready, and then maybe have him on the opening day roster in 2025. But less certainty, I think, with Gilbert than with James Wood probably getting that opportunity. Jackson Jobe completed a side session. He's working his way back from the IL, so some good news there from the Tigers organization. Jordan Beck was scheduled to have hand surgery on Wednesday.
I won him in one of my auctions that
Beck?
day. Yeah.
On the day of the surgery?
For $1. No, on the day of the injury.
Day of the injury. It's tough because the K rate's been really high, but it's his first.
It was like I was just
first foray against big league pitching. Like, what do you expect?
Also, a little bit of a notch in the belt for swinging strike rate being more predictive than strikeout rate. He did have high swinging strike rates in the minors,
even at AAA when the K rate came down.
I think so. 12.9 is not. You see a 19.8% strikeout rate, you assume kind of like a 10.
I think the interesting thing about Jordan Beck, though, is the only level prior to his big league debut where the K rate got really high was his first exposure to AA last season. He was 22. It wasn't like he was old for the level or anything. I like the long-term outlook here quite a bit. The hit tool is the question. I think you're right to point out the swinging strike rate, but kind of like the Jett Williams situation, although not quite as highly regarded, a guy you'd want to get back in a trade for later if you're playing for now and can afford to just wait and say, I'll see what happens in 2025.
Someone cuts him in auto-new and you can pick him up for $1 or $2 like that. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, still some stash appeal there. Chase DeLauter is back after dealing with a foot injury. He's playing at AA Akron right now. We'll see if he gets going. And then Joey Cantillo is starting his rehab assignment.
Does Chase DeLauter still have a job waiting for him?
And as of right now, no. He just has to stay healthy and produce and on the road.
I think the question is how good is Tyler Freeman? I think Tyler Freeman right now is playing to 95 WRC plus, which is amazing because you might look at the batting average and say what, but it's a ton of contact. It's not completely powerless. He has a 109 max EV and a 4.9% barrel rate. It's a 237 BABIP if that regresses positively, you could have a 275 hitter here with 10 plus home run power and 10 plus steals, who's playing center field decently. It's not always like the long-term plan, but it's also kind of hard to be like, okay, Tyler Freeman, we're trying to chase the DeLauter now, especially when you're winning, right?
Yeah, things are going well. They're showing us a lot more power than we expected and making us look silly for talking them down on our AL Central episode a few weeks back. I do think it's interesting that before the injuries, DeLauter had played more in center field than in the corners this year. So that gives you an idea of where they're trying to fit him in.
And they seem more desperate there. I mean, they're trying Freeman there. They tried to get Florial. Like they're trying to figure out center field. They DFA'd Straw, they're worried about center field.
I think it's Freeman and Will Brennan to an extent. You're looking at what those guys give you with the bat compared to what DeLauter eventually gives you with the bat, and that will be the relative measuring stick for whether or not DeLauter gets up and gets an opportunity in the second half of this season. But he's got to solve AA first, probably makes a stop at AAA. I think we're still talking about a couple of months at the earliest before he's a part of the plan.
It's crazy, but Freeman may have more power than Will Brennan. I don't think that you would have said that before the season, but in terms of raw power, Freeman is ahead. And in terms of barrel rate, Brennan just ahead by like a single decimal or, a single percentage point. Like, I don't know.
It does line up with scouting.
I'm picking Freeman over Brennan.
Yeah, I think I would too. More versatility. 35 raw power, 30 game power from Fangraphs. The last report from them. So I know Will Brennan seems like just a clear backup outfielder. Tyler Freeman might be more like a regular or a more versatile player because he can play on the dirt and in the outfield, and that bodes well for his long-term playing time. We talked about some low barrelers on the show on Tuesday, and there was a prospect in the news that I think kind of fits into this. It's Jacob Wilson. He's on the 7-day IL with a knee injury right now, and I think by scouting reports, he fits into that Bryce Terang, Stephen Kwan kind of mold that we're talking about. And it comes down to, do you think he's a good enough defender, or do you think he's capable of developing more pop, or like what other facets of his game can play up alongside the hit tool if he is in fact going to be a low barreler in the long run? Because right now it looks like a pick that the A's are somewhat right on, even though there were more dynamic players they could have taken with that 6th overall pick. And the results have been fantastic. It's just not the type of player that we ordinarily get that excited about from a prospecting perspective.
Yeah, it's super bizarre, actually. I mean, it's like a 4% walk rate, 9% strikeout rate from Jacob Wilson in the minors. And they only tracked, we have one tracked ball over 100 miles per hour. It's 100.2 in AAA, but it's a small sample in AAA, of course, 25 plate appearances. So we want more time there. But, you know, if he didn't have a 250 ISO in AA, I would say this is all legs, and this is all, you know, putting the bat on the ball, and there is no real power here. Fangraphs raw 30-35, game 20-30, but hit 60-70 on Jacob Wilson. Yeah, it's a really interesting profile. It's Stephen Kwan, Luis Arias at shortstop. I mean, it's obviously going to have a lot of real value, but what kind of value he has in fantasy is a question mark.
Yeah, I'm finding myself unimpressed from a fantasy perspective, but genuinely curious from a real life perspective.
Yeah.
If it's enough hit tool to make that work.
And he has
the ball on these players.
I think he has to hit the ball harder than 100. You know, Luis Arias hits the ball harder than 100 in terms of raw power. And if you think about it, Nick Allen made a lot of contact and was a great defensive shortstop in the minors. And he demonstrates what happens when you just don't have enough power to be a major leaguer, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Let's move on to some other news here. We had a recent promotion. Spencer Schwellenback debuted for Atlanta, and filling that last spot in the rotation has been a little bit tricky. A couple injuries for the Braves too. AJ Smith-Shawver is hurt right now. Owen Murphy needs Tommy John. So Murphy was a little further away, of course, but just looking at their current need, Schwellenback debuted against the Nationals. You know, I thought he pitched pretty well. 5 innings, 3 earned. I think Lane Thomas got him for a homer, 5 Ks, 1 walk. Did you see anything in the pitch mix, in the stuff model that gives you some interest in Schwellenbach, even if it's only a short-term opportunity for him in the Atlanta rotation?
Yeah, a good fastball, you know, and a good slider, really. There will be some question maybe about things beyond that. In terms of the other pitches he threw the fastball and the slider only a combined 54% of the time last time out. So he threw inferior pitches, and that's why his overall stuff grade won't be that great. But it might still be good news that he threw those inferior pitches. The fact that he has them, the fact that they may be major league quality. You can't look at one game of Stuff Plus and say, oh, the curveball is not good, especially not the changeup. You can't say that's no good because of one game. You look at the grade, a 50-55 grade from Fangraphs on the changeup. If he does have a 50-55 changeup and then has a plus fastball and a plus slider, and then evidence in the minor leagues of good feel in terms of walk rates and strikeout rates, at least, I'm excited about him. And in fact, there may be more of a complete package here than you had with AJ Smith-Shawver. So if the news is that he stays up, and also he sat 95.8, so I'm in. If there's any news that he's staying up, or you know, I want to see more. I think this was a good debut. There's one start is really low information for anything. But in the stuff model, you want to have good four-seam fastball and slider after one start, because those are the ones that have the most signal, and he did that. So you do that, you throw 5 pitches, you sit 95.8, you got my attention.
Yeah, and I think that window could be open for a little while. I mean, they're using Ray Kerr as a starter right now, but Smith-Shawver's injury is a grade 2 left oblique strain. That's not going to be a quick turnaround. So Schwellenback will go on the road to Boston as the schedule currently lines up for his second big league start.
Awful. That's just awful.
Well,
I'm hoping, what you could do, what I'll do is put a very small bid on him or stash him in a way where I don't have to start him. And then if I don't win him, or, I want to avoid that start in Boston.
Sure. I think Schwellenbach's going to be one of the more widely available options for 15-team leagues. In some 12s, you're going to have the choice of maybe going after Ben Brown or Schwellenbach. So I'm curious if you're choosing between the two, how you might rank them or prioritize them.
I know I just said some nice things about Schwellenbach having a larger arsenal, but at this point, when you're making that decision, it's about schedule too.
Yeah, that's a good factor to consider. And as far as Ben Brown goes, his next start would be, it's going to be Sunday. We're going to see him again before Fab runs, home against the Reds. And then next week, he'd be on the road at Great American Ballpark against the Reds again.
The Reds are a really bad team on the road, but pitching in Cincinnati is not awesome. But you know what? There's a whiff of dominance about these two pitches that I might risk it.
It looked really good watching him earlier this week against the Brewers. The other pitcher you might be thinking about, at least in 12-team leagues, I think he's mostly rostered in 15s, is Matt Waldron, knuckleballing his way to kind of keep a spot in this rotation for the Padres. Looking at his upcoming schedule, he's also got a 2-start week. So even if you weren't interested based on what he was doing on merit, by schedule at the Angels and home against the Diamondbacks is going to put him on a lot of rosters, at least temporarily. But is there a longer-term case that you can make for Matt Waldron?
Yes. Not only that, the next stop is at New York, the Mets. And then it's not till June 19th at Philly that you kind of get a little nervous. Lastly, about Waldron, he is now the reigning knuckleball velo king. He has now thrown 2 harder knuckleballs than the hardest that we ever tracked from R.A. Dickey. R.A. Dickey himself told me that that velo was important for him. And in my piece up today, I have this nugget: knuckleballs over 80 miles an hour produce a 190 batting average and a 292 slugging. Knuckleballs under 80 miles per hour produce a 255 batting average and a 417 slugging. So 100 points plus of slugging you lose when you're over 80. And guess what? He's sat 80 on the knuckleball 2 starts in a row. They've been his best starts. I think there's a chance here for one of the best knuckleballs of recent vintage, because R.A. Dickey threw his fastball 85 and he got his knuckleball up to 84. Matt Waldron throws his fastball 91.
Do you think there's still some room for some growth? Maybe. Knuckleballs are just so unique. There's so few guys that have thrown them that you can't even like project off of them. You're like, oh, he's just got this, and shrug emoji, but it's like a smiling shrug emoji. It's like, yay!
Yeah, but there's some shrugging in there. It's hard to project. I don't think we don't have a 85 mile an hour knuckleball ever. So if he throws an 85 mile knuckleball, he will be in rarefied air. He will have no comps almost, And then just the fact that he throws a full arsenal is just super weird, because the way you throw a knuckleball, you can see it coming. So there's no like, oh, am I throwing the fastball or the knuckleball? Like as the hitter, you're like, oh, that's the knuckleball, in terms of his delivery and stuff. So it is weird that he has these other pitches. He should almost not have the other pitches. The other thing that's cool about the knuckleball is it moves actually like any other pitch on a pitch to pitch level. So it moves like a slider or like a changeup, or, it's just a random number generator. It's a random pitch shape generator. You just don't know what it's going to be. And so that's what's so brilliant about it. So that's why most knuckleballers have just thrown mostly knuckleballs.
Yeah, that's pretty
why
cool.
Throw a sweeper when they see your arm slot and say, if they see your mechanics and be like, okay, this is either fastball or sweeper, basically. And then they see mechanics of the knuckleball, but the knuckleball could be anything. Then I think you should throw more knuckleballs. I think you should throw them as hard as you can.
Do you think the ideal knuckleballer has the knuckler they can throw like half the time or 60% of the time, but then they have two pitches that play off each other instead of just one? Like if you were just knuckleball, fastball.
If I built the best knuckleballer, it'd be like Ben Brown with a knuckleball, right? Where he's just like dominating 2-pitch thing, or oh god, what the hell is this?
Right. Oh, you're on one of my 2 pitches. Here, have a knuckleball. Enjoy this. I mean, it's extremely hard to do with command. That's why it doesn't happen. But
right.
But yes, if you could,
maybe David Fletcher will do it. He could be on his way back.
His velo is a little lighter on the knuckleball so far, but that's the thing. I would look at that and say, well, just give it time. Like projecting.
He struck out Jackson Holiday with the knuckleball. David Fletcher. Yes, David Fletcher. That David Fletcher, the one with the bookie friend.
David Fletcher's having a much more interesting 2024 than anybody would have expected.
Yes, I think so.
I mean, he knew all these things were happening.
Might be happening, yeah.
But none of us did until March. Like since March, like a low key, like very intriguing character in baseball. The other thing a lot of people are going to be doing, of course, this week, they've already taken one shot probably at trying to find some outfield help for Ronald Acuna Jr. But if you're looking for outfielders this week, there's a handful of names we wanted to bring up. Nelson Velasquez more for shallow leagues. I think people have been really patient with him this year. Just had a 2-homer game on Wednesday. Do you think the patience will finally be rewarded? We know Velasquez hits the ball very, very hard. So he's, to me, seems the kind of player that if he goes on a heater, he could have a month's worth of stats in a week and make up for some lost time pretty quickly.
Yeah, and another one of my favorites, although I didn't spend a lot on him, was MJ Melendez. And they're playing him and they're winning, but those two things may not continue at the same rate. I think that the more you win, the more you say, do we want to sit somebody today for Velasquez? I guess there's some injury though, because Dairon Blanco is playing. So Isbell is hurt. MJ Melendez can't play center. Renfro's not a good center fielder. Velasquez is not center fielder, so that's irrelevant. Dairon Blanco is a guy you could pick up if you just want steals. He's taking over in center while Isbell's hurt. But on the corners, it's Melendez, Pasquantino, Renfro, and Velasquez. And there's really actually 4 jobs for them.
Yeah.
So I think who's Velasquez fighting? Nick Pratto?
Yeah. He's fighting himself. I mean, you're always worried about the next guy coming up from AAA. Like even Pratto's not on the roster, but he could be a big side platoon guy, and then that causes problems for Velasquez. It's interesting too to me. I'm looking at the roster rates on CBS. Jake Meyers still 35% rostered. If that,
we made the case for him last week.
We've thrown that out there before. I thought that number would be higher when I looked into it. So I would say, look, if Jake Meyers is still out there and you're in a shallow enough league, and you're reeling from that Acuna injury, that's one way to work around it. 2 names to throw at you before we go.
Chaz, my boy, went 0 for 4 last night. Did not look good.
The pressure on Chaz McCormick right now is
dude, it's not good. He's not in a good space.
If you're in the deep situation and you're looking at guys like Miguel Andujar and Corey Julks, and you're trying to take your shot on one of those guys, they're both like 6% rostered in 12-team leagues. This is more for like 15s. Who do you like better between Julks and Andujar as guys on sub 500 teams that should play a lot?
I think I like Julks a little bit better. Better home park. What Andujar has going for him is better power, better raw power, but Julks is going to steal some bases. And Julks has had better demonstrated power in the past. And, if he hits the ball 110 this year, he'll get more of my attention because he steals bases and he could be a slightly more even line. Whereas Andujar is not going to steal you any bases. He's not going to take you any walks. He's going to hit in Oakland. So you're going to really be depending on a lot of those balls finding grass. Once they stop doing that, he's going to have a better batting average and equalish power, I think, and less speed.
It's really interesting to me that some of the scouting takes on Jelks were, power over hit for a long time, because when you look at how he controls the strike zone, like he chases a little bit, but he draws a lot of walks. He doesn't strike out a lot. This is the type of player, when you give someone in their late 20s playing time and you're a bad team, this is the kind of player you play.
Pop.
Yeah. We talked about Stone Garrett's kind of like that. Just has stuff that he does that's really interesting. On a team like Houston last year, the playing time was going to be up and down, but with the White Sox, just keep penciling Corey Jelks into the lineup. I think you're right. I think Jelks over Andujar makes sense, but if you're looking at one, you're probably looking at the other, at least as a contingency bid. Good luck with the bids this weekend. We have our Friday live stream coming on Friday at 1 o'clock with Trevor May. So be sure to check that out on our YouTube page. If you want a subscription to The Athletic, tons of great stuff to read over there. TheAthletic.com/ratesandbarrels gets you the best current offer that we have available for that. You can find Eno on Twitter at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. Find the podcast at Rates and Barrels. That's going to do it. We're back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.